and welcome to the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. I'm your host, Shannon Crow. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm recording today on the land of the Anishinaabe, Odawa, and Mississauga people, which is about 3 hours north of Toronto in Ontario, Canada, which is most often called the Bruce Peninsula. If you are new here, you might not know that I'm also a mom of 3, a yoga teacher, and the founder of Pelvic Health Professionals. And if you are a returning listener, and if you have been listening for all of these years, you know that this podcast was created for you, the yoga teacher, so that each and every week you are connected to the information and inspiration that's going to support you as you build your yoga business. In today's episode, I want to summarize what it feels like as I sit here and realize that we have now made it to 6 years of podcast episodes. And really, it's unbelievable that it has been that long. It doesn't feel like it really. Now, time might be wonky because of the pandemic, or maybe time is speeding up because I'm getting older and I have 3 kids who are now all adults. I don't think so, though, and that's why I thought it might be helpful to share this with you in case you're looking at putting yourself out there in any way, doing a project. Maybe it's a workshop, maybe it's a teacher training, maybe it's writing a blog post, writing a book. If in some way this story of I started here and I had no idea, if that's inspiring or helpful in any way, that's sort of my goal for today's episode. It's also to answer questions because many of you have reached out over the last week or so in me telling you, hey, the podcast is coming up to 6 years. What are your questions and thoughts on that? Some of you have reached out and shared some questions, so I hope I can answer those as well. Before we dive into this, I want to thank you because you, dear listener, have made this possible. You're here listening. Maybe you've listened to another episode. Lots of you have shared the podcast. Thank you if you've left a review. If you have not left a review, it would be a great way to say, let's celebrate together, or happy podiversary. What is that word? Podiversary? If you leave us a review, and you can do that over in iTunes. You can also do that from our Facebook page. We love to hear from you. I also want to thank you for asking questions. Those of you who are in the Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group, your questions are really the fuel for this podcast. Once we see questions happening over and over again in there, or if there's a topic of discussion and there's lots of comments, we know this is something that yoga teachers really want to help each other with or are struggling with. That is really where we get the fuel for this podcast. It's from you. So thank you for being here. Gosh, if you've listened to 6 years of this podcast, I want to hear from you. I want to hear, what topics would you like us to cover next? You get to reach out to me personally and let me know. You can do that by either emailing podcast@theconnectedyogateacher.com, or we have a handy chat bubble on our website. You can type in there. I read those. Or you can leave us a voice message, which is really my favorite way to hear from you. Thank you also to our amazing team over here. Someone was asking me this week, how did you build this team? You know what, Connected Yoga Teachers? These people are amazing. Suzanne does our audio engineering. Her and her husband, Jeff, live off the grid in Michigan in some cabin. I've never met them in person. I feel very close to both of them. Suzanne does work where she donates money to dog rescue work when she gets extra money from her podcasting. I mean, not only does she do a great job doing the audio part of this podcast, she's also just really cares about creatures and the earth and people, and I'm really glad that Suzanne's on the team. Crunch is out traveling the world and writing for other health and wellness businesses as well as us, and she really makes sure that you have very in-depth notes. Crunch grabs quotes. She has ideas about podcasts. She has great questions for me as she's going through those notes. She lets me know, hey, Shannon, maybe this sounded weird, or hey, this is a question I have about the yoga world. And that gives such a great extra little bit to this podcast. So I super appreciate Crunch and the writing work that she does over here. Sinead on our team, Sinead O'Connor, not the singer, the other Sinead O'Connor, is a yoga teacher as well as our virtual assistant here who's really taking care of the community. I talk to Sinead the most on our team because she works not only with the podcast here, but also on the side of pelvic health professionals. And Sinead is an amazing person who works so efficiently to take care of our community. If you're ever looking for a VA, I know that Sinead has one spot that just opened up. You can head on over to our website. If you look under About, you can see our team there, and you can check out the work that Sinead's doing and reach out to her. If you send us an email, you'll reach Sinead, but she also has a website of her own, and you can reach out to her there. She's amazing. She's also a mom of 3 kids and does so much in her own life as well as here in our community, in our Facebook group, for the podcast, all kinds of things. A couple people that you don't hear about very often on the podcast that also work on our team is our bookkeeping team. So it's not like they necessarily put the podcast episodes together with us, but Kelly and Dixie make sure that the numbers work out at the end of the year and that our taxes are done and give, some key pointers in terms of like, here's where your expenses are happening. Here's where your income is coming from. Those types of things. Those very important conversations. So I also want to say that they're part of the team. Yeah, they're not working on the podcast, but the work that they do enables me to focus more on the podcast. I also want to thank our sponsor, OfferingTree. If you are thinking about or wondering about OfferingTree, which I highly recommend if you're a yoga teacher who wants to automate your website, your booking system, your payments, and much, much more, I also want you to know that this is a company that I recommend because of their values and what they put first. They're a company that really cares about helping yoga teachers and students, and they care about yoga as well. Yeah, they have the best all-in-one online software that I have come across since becoming a yoga teacher, but I really love their company values that go along with this. And that's why they're a sponsor of the podcast, and that's why I'm so grateful that they're our sponsor. It's such a good fit. And they have a discount code for all of our listeners. That's over at offeringtree.com/Shannon. Today's episode is also brought to you by Pelvic Health Professionals. That's an online membership if you want to learn the most up-to-date information about pelvic health from amazing worldwide guest experts. And I'm really excited that Shelley Prosco is going to be teaching a 7-week series as part of that. So you can sign up. If you're not a member, you can still sign up for this. But if you are a member, watch out for that because it's coming at you soon. You'll hear about it very soon. And if you're thinking, you know what, I want to check this out and maybe sign up, that's over at pelvichealthprofessionals.com. So how does it feel to be podcasting for 6 years? I've really been sitting with this today. One thing that I want to take in is just being in this moment of, wow, I got here. I didn't know what I was facing when I decided, hey, I want to start a podcast because I really like yoga teachers to be connected with information, but also be connected to this supportive community. I had no idea what that would mean 6 years later. And it's a good thing that I didn't know. If you are looking at a big project, don't look at all the what ifs and where that might lead you. Don't let that hold you back or scare you. Dive in, see what it feels like, try it on. I'm here 6 years later because I really enjoy this work. Connected yoga teachers, I just took a moment here to be in this moment with my breath and also scrolling through. We have this spreadsheet that we keep, which is every single podcast episode since we started this back in February of 2017, where every single episode is listed out. the episode number, the date that it was released, the guest, and the topic. And the reason why the spreadsheet is really powerful up to 6 years, like 313 episodes on here, and there's some bonus ones as well. The reason why it's really powerful is because I'm looking at this list of guest names and seeing like so many people that I still am in contact with, or I see the work that they're doing out in the world, or I sit here and wonder like, what is that person doing now? I wonder what they're doing. So it's really cool to scroll through and see the individuals who came on the podcast and talked about really interesting things, sometimes tough topics, sometimes, really concrete, like here's how to build your Facebook or your Instagram or your LinkedIn social media. Sometimes like, here are the steps to do this, or sometimes very nuanced conversation and topics. My podcast ideas used to live in a journal that I had. I wonder where that journal is. I know I'll have it somewhere. I remember it was like pink or red. And I just wrote down all of the ideas that I thought would be helpful for yoga teachers. That's the one thing that has really kept me going in this. On the very tough days, because there are tough days in any job, even if you love it, I come back to how can I help the people that I'm here to work for? And that's yoga teachers for me. And maybe you're a yoga teacher who wants to put a series together to help people who are dealing with persistent pain, or to help people to be able to get up off the floor, or be able to play and laugh with their kids and not be tired all of the time. I don't know what it is that you do, but I know that yoga teachers share in this goal of helping other people generally. I have my list now of podcast ideas over in, I just looked at it now. I try not to look here too often because it can feel overwhelming. And let me tell you, I never sit here thinking, what will we do now? What will we're running out of ideas. That never happens. There's this huge list. I just keep a running list just so that my brain doesn't worry about losing an idea. Let's say a yoga teacher reaches out to me and says, this is a struggle I'm really having. Can you do a podcast on this? That goes to the top because I like to hear from listeners. I use Trello for my lists and business stuff. I use Trello. I'm used to it. I really like Trello. I know people use all kinds of task management systems, but in my podcast ideas and application board, I just keep this ongoing list of things. And I am looking now. I don't think it allows me to look at the, let me just tell you, connected yoga teachers, this would be years of content. Me looking at this right now, I'm like, oh yeah, we didn't do that yet. Oh, right. It is endless. That's when you know you're really on the right track. One huge part of doing this is that I know my niche. I'm not just jumping on a podcast and talking about random things in my life. I know that my podcast is for yoga teachers to help yoga teachers with their questions. And that's still pretty broad. It could narrow down, niche down to, helping yoga teachers who want to get more students, helping yoga teachers who want to learn about anatomy. Right now, I like that it isn't super niche down. There are things that I talk about a lot. Many of you know that I love to talk about pelvic health topics. That definitely comes into the work. Also niching down, marketing, running a sustainable business as a yoga teacher, self-care. There are threads that come in that I do love to talk about for sure. I also have some tags in here that I'm looking at where it says priority dream guest. And I'm looking at that list and we've had some of those guests on. So I might have made a note here, but then also, just put it in my ideas list. And when I'm scrolling through this, I'm like, we did that. We booked that dream guest. That's exciting. I want to definitely to have a look at those ones and see if we can get those on in the next year or two. I also have a list here that's new applications that I need to look at and sort through. Those are people who have submitted an application to be a guest on the podcast. And I appreciate this so much. And I feel kind of bad that I can't just fit everyone in all at once. But obviously, we put out one episode a week. That's what I can manage right now, which seems a lot some weeks. But it also means that I have to wait to talk about really cool topics and wait to talk with really cool people. Now, if you're ever wondering, how can I get on this list of applying to be on the podcast? Well, first of all, I would say make sure you've listened to lots of episodes with me, because once you know my interview style, the topics that are important to me and that I like to talk about here on the podcast, the topics that are really important to our listeners, and how I like to focus on helping yoga teachers as much as possible in an episode, that just gives you an edge when you go to apply. That gives you a little standing out power. I also have done some podcasts on how to get on the podcast. So you can go to theconnectedyogateacher.com, go into the search bar and just type in podcast or podcast guest and check that out. Under podcast, you can check out apply to be a guest, as well as all of our podcast episodes. And to be very, very, very honest here, people who I want to interview on the podcast are people who have been following along on this journey. So if you have been listening to the podcast for 6 years, or even a year or 6 months, reach out to me and tell me if you have an idea that you think would be helpful for other yoga teachers to hear. You understand me and our audience more than, the super famous guest who wrote a book on something and wants to tell our podcast listeners about it. I love authors and books and helpful tips in that way, but I also love to hear from people who are not quote unquote famous out in the world yet. Connected Yoga Teachers, I do want to pop in here really quick to give a special note about OfferingTree, and especially today as we're at 6 years of podcasting, because OfferingTree brings this exact episode to your ears. And it takes our team about 9 to 10 hours of work for us to get a podcast ready for you. That's on average. So sometimes it's more, sometimes it's a little bit less, but it's mostly 9 to 10 hours of work. And when I first started podcasting, we didn't put as much into every single episode for sure. So maybe it was a little bit less than that, but maybe we've also gotten faster. So maybe it was about the same. But I also, when I first started this, I didn't think about sponsorship. I wasn't actually thinking, how are we going to make this sustainable and continue on? But as I got to know companies like OfferingTree, and the team that works for OfferingTree and their values, and especially as I got using their software in my own business, that's what really makes, for me, in my view, that's what makes a sponsorship partnership really work. If I'm already talking about an amazing product that I use that makes my life easier, and I want to tell other yoga teachers about it, and then when I know that that company wants to support our podcast and they want to give our listeners a discount, it just feels like it's a win-win-win. So if you're looking for that discount, our listeners get 50% off your first 3 months or 15% off of an annual plan over at offeringtree.com/Shannon. And also let OfferingTree know if you heard about them through our podcast. You can tag them on social media and just let them know. You can, when you reach out to the company and you have a question, maybe you're looking at their software, say, hey, we heard about this on the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast. That really helps them to know that, hey, I heard about this from Shannon on the Connected Yoga Teacher podcast, and that lets them know that this is a good place to continue to support yoga teachers. I also want to mention that I am so grateful to be in this place where it feels like this work that I'm doing is the right fit. I hear from yoga teachers often who are like, this episode was perfect timing for me. Or, I was struggling with this issue. Thank you so much for doing a podcast on it. Or they ask a question in the Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group and I can share an answer right away. Like, not to worry, we have a whole podcast on this or an article or whatever. that's when I know this work really feels like the right fit. And I've had different jobs through the years, and I've been an entrepreneur in a different way through the years where I learned many things. But this work feels different than those. This work, I feel like I've, at 6 years in, I've hit this stride of, we keep continuing to go for sure. We're like a train that has momentum, but then we can try out new things as we go. And I just feel settled in it. It feels like there's more ease in this work. And I find so much joy in talking to cool guests, cool yoga teachers, and such joy in connecting people to each other as well. I'm also super grateful for the support. Huge gratitude to Sean, who encouraged me years ago. You know what? Do it. Try it. When I said, hey, I'm thinking about starting a podcast. Also to my family and my friends who, some of them know what I do. Some of them are like, oh yeah, she does some yoga thing. I get a lot of support from family and friends. And I also have to say, not just because this was like yesterday's task, I have been loving my therapy sessions. I go see Diane Liska. She's a psychotherapist that does yoga-informed psychotherapy. She's amazing. I don't know if she has any openings. I'm going to give her a shout out anyway. And I made a commitment, thanks to one of our podcast guests, to saying like therapy's so important. I made this commitment to just have it on the calendar, kind of like maintenance on my car or booking a haircut, going to therapy and looking at my own stuff, like what's triggering me lately? Why is that? That has been very helpful. And helpful when I deal with different things that come up with the work that I do here on the podcast. There are some podcast episodes and some, I don't want to say roadblocks that I've hit, but like some challenges that I've faced as a podcaster and as a human here putting out content, that if I would have known the challenge that I was potentially going to face, I might not have started. They felt really big in the moment. It felt really overwhelming. And I'm still here. I still got through those things. And having a support team like Sean as a very supportive partner, my kids, my friends and family who really support the work that I do, and having a really great therapist, that's like the dream team right there of, who can I turn to when the days are tough? I've also learned over and over again that podcasting is not about having all the answers. It is about listening for me and being okay with having more questions than answers and being okay with feeling like, wow, I messed that up, or wow, I had no idea. That has been a tremendous lesson. Also, what's helpful to me is walking outside. Many of you know that I love to share about this on Instagram. Walk outside and chat with yoga teachers in my stories. And honestly, I've developed a whole new appreciation for winter and walking outside, thanks to many of you listeners for tagging me when you also get outside. It's made it easier. We're getting near the end of February here. I'm getting ready to go tap trees to make maple syrup with my family. And I just love the time that I get to have out in nature. And that does really help me as an entrepreneur and as a podcaster. In summary, I am incredibly grateful. And a lot of that gratitude is to you because you are here listening and supporting the podcast. And you're the reason for the podcast. Like, it really exists because of you. And I want to tell you also that I hesitated to do like a 6 years of podcasting episode today. I was like, well, I've got other topic ideas, and do people really want to hear this summary? And I come back to how can I make this helpful for yoga teachers? I guess the main thing is that I want you to know that you can have a small idea and it can be fueled by something. Like, I know what it felt like to be in yoga teacher training, leave that, feel kind of like, oh my gosh, I'm out in the wilderness here and I don't know which part of this to focus on first. And I don't want to just keep signing up for expensive trainings all over the place. And some of those trainings I got into were kind of culty feeling and not great spaces, or some of the online Facebook groups were pretty grumpy and prickly and didn't feel very supportive. So I felt like this was missing in some of the yoga conversations that I was part of or seeing online or seeing in different trainings. And so I felt like this is something I would like to have. I think other yoga teachers really want this. And that was my idea. And I had no idea, really, what I was doing. None. I didn't know about audio or all the tech to put a podcast together. The whole picture of the project would have been way too much for my brain. So if you have an idea, what is one small baby step that you could do towards that idea today? For me, like I said, it was my journal where I just wrote down ideas. And that's what got the ball rolling. And I didn't even start it as a podcast. I started it as a Facebook Live series. So maybe you start your idea like, I'm going to talk about this in my Instagram stories, or as a Facebook Live, or I'm going to write a blog about it. Whatever it is, what's the baby step that you could do to try it out and see how it feels? And if you're doing that, if you're taking that baby step, I want to hear about it. So let me know in a voicemail. You can do that over at the connectedyogateacher.com website. Look for the button to leave me a voice message. Or you can post it in our Facebook group, the Connected Yoga Teacher Facebook group. And maybe we can hang out together in real time. So over in Pelvic Health Professionals, I'm hanging out with people online. Shelley Prosco is actually going to be teaching us over there from April the 11th to May the 23rd. I'm super excited about that because I get to be the student right along with you. And we get to be there live together or watching the replay. I am going to be sharing a link soon. Maybe I can put one in the show notes for this episode, which is theconnectedyogateacher.com/313. But if not, head on over to pelvichealthprofessionals.com and you'll find out more about that, or ask me if we don't have it up yet. Also, March the 20th, we're going to be talking with Dr. Nidhi Sharma about the pudendal nerve and all of the things related to pelvic health about that. If you're like, what? Oh, I want to learn about that. I know it's really specific. We have lots of other things going on inside of Pelvic Health Professionals and lots of resources and guest speakers. Head on over to pelvichealthprofessionals.com to check that out and look for the members area and the guest speakers to really see like, what have we talked about with who and what's coming up. Next week on the podcast, we are going to be talking about planning your breaks. Speaking of baby steps, we're going to start really small with this, planning your breaks. If you feel like you cannot fit everything in, if your schedule feels all over the place, if you feel like I'm an entrepreneur and I wanted to do this so that I'm in charge of my schedule, but I'm not, or I need more time off, or I'm really, really tired, that's why we're going to talk about this. And we're going to spend a couple of episodes on this. First, I'm going to tell you some things that I use that I hope will be helpful in planning your breaks. And then we're going to hear from yoga teachers who either fit breaks in or are not fitting breaks in. So stay tuned. That's coming up next week and the following week. And then I've got some more on this topic that will be in a few weeks. Thank you so much for being here today. It means a lot that you have spent your time here hanging out together, and maybe you're walking around outside, maybe you're cleaning or just rolling around on the floor. It means a lot that you've hung out here. And I'm curious to know, what will you be doing this week to stay connected to yourself, your yoga practice, and to your community so that you can share the yoga that lights you up?